Okay, so thank you for joining us. For those of you that are able to watch this recording a little bit later to learn a little bit more about our program here at Provincial and Demonstration Schools branch. As Patricia said, my name is Christy and I'm here with my colleague Amy, and we are both consultants with the Provincial and Demonstration Schools branch. And today we've decided we're just going to talk a little bit about some technology that you might have in your program or that you might see students looking to get recommendations for, and then some accommodations that we can put into programming as well. We have lots more information that we'd be happy to share. So we just decided to pick a couple of things to share with you in our time together today. So just a little bit about where we come from. Provincial and Demonstration Schools branch is a branch in the Ministry of Education, and we're kind of split into two parts. So we have a school side, and on that side we have our three schools for the deaf, and they are located in Belleville, Milton, and London. And those same locations have schools for students with significant learning disabilities. And then we also have a school for the blind, low vision, and deaf blind, and that is in Brantford. And then on the resource services side, that's where Amy and I come from. So we work as consultants in this program, and we support the 72 district school boards. We support third-party agencies. We do lots of work with teacher candidates and ECE candidates. We're really fortunate to be able to work with Chiefs of Ontario in providing PD such as this. So that's kind of where we are. We also have home visiting teachers, and those are teachers who are paired with families who have a child diagnosed with a hearing difference, and they actually do home visits, and it's a parent education program. And we'll show you at the end of this session how to access those services. So this is our mission statement. Several years ago, we got together as a department and we talked about how we could best tell people what we do and what our goals were in providing education for deaf and hard of hearing learners. So we want to provide exceptional education for all deaf and hard of hearing children and youth, their families, stakeholders, and educators throughout the province of Ontario. We've done a lot of work recently in collecting data, and our data shows that we're doing a really good job of supporting those students and families in Southern Ontario. We know we need to do better outside of Southern Ontario, which is why we really appreciate this partnership. And hopefully we can continue to spread the word so that people outside of Southern Ontario know how to access our services and that we can continue to offer support for deaf and hard of hearing learners. So as I mentioned, today we're going to talk about technology to support deaf and hard of hearing learners. We're going to talk about some accommodations that we always say are beneficial for all, necessary for some. So we'll talk about those, and then a little bit about resource services, which is where Amy and I work. So here is an interesting statistic to get us started. We know that the Ontario Infant Hearing Program reports approximately 4 in 1,000 babies are identified with a hearing level at birth or will develop an early progressive childhood hearing level. I actually think that number is a little bit larger if we think about those students who have ear infections and recurring ear infections and issues with otitis media. So we know the infant hearing program, which was instituted in this province in 2002, has done a remarkable job of testing the hearing of a very high percentage of babies. It's in the high 90% of babies that are tested in the hospital. We know there are still limitations to this program because this relies on families having access to the infant hearing program. So living in a center where they are doing infant hearing screening. So we know that that is an issue too. So we know some children are getting missed. We know that during COVID, those third-party agencies weren't allowed in hospitals to do that quick check. So those babies may have gotten missed. And the program has done a remarkable job of contacting those families and imparting the importance of having early hearing screening done. But then again, the onus is on the family to bring that child to a center to have their hearing tested. If families don't necessarily see the urgency, if they have no one in their family who has ever had a hearing difference, they may decide to wait. And then they don't notice there might be an issue with hearing until things like speech and language delays start to arise. And again, having onus on families sometimes means that families have to travel great distances to find a center where they can have their baby's hearing tested. The other issue is that if a baby passes that hearing screening, then a lot of times families think their child's hearing will always be fine. I just met a family recently, actually, whose baby did pass the hearing screening, and then ended up being profoundly deaf, and it wasn't discovered until a couple of years later. So we know hearing differences can occur at any time for any number of reasons. So we need to work as a team to make sure we're watching out for things like that. So families, community agencies, childcare centers, everybody needs to kind of know the warning signals and to be mindful of hearing differences and that they can occur at any time. One thing we really wanted to highlight today is the impact of conductive hearing differences, or those hearing differences that can arise from having multiple ear infections in early childhood. We know that early childhood is prime time to have ear infections. I think the estimate is that any given time, about 10% of young children might have something happening in their middle ear. The issue with having recurring ear infections or fluid in your ear is that we know that it decreases decibel levels to some extent. We don't necessarily know how much. We just know that children aren't hearing things as clearly as they would be if they had no ear infection or no fluid in their ears. This can have a significant impact for a child on their academic development. Because they're not hearing clearly, because they're hearing things a little bit muffled. We know that language is the most important thing to access curriculum, to accelerate future growth for our children. And this graphic just shows how much is involved in language. It's so much more than just speaking and listening. It encompasses all of this. So being able to think, compare, wonder, predict, have a conversation, know what it is to have a joke or understand a joke. All of those things are language, and not being able to hear clearly or to access language fully can really impact a student's future language growth. I wanted to take just a minute to talk about an audiogram. An audiogram is a visual representation of how we hear sound. So the numbers we see down the left side of the audiogram represent how loud a sound has to be in decibels for us to hear it. The numbers across the top represent the pitch or frequency of a sound, and we measure that in hertz. So the pictures we see strewn about this audiogram very loosely demonstrate how loud each of those objects might sound and at what frequency they resonate at. That banana or bean-shaped area that we see is often referred to as the speech banana, and that's where the majority of our speech sounds land with regards to loudness and pitch. So you can see there are two lines on the audiogram. One is red and one is blue. The red line is representative of the right ear, so we can remember red for right, and the blue represents the left ear. So the way these are plotted on this audiogram demonstrates a mild hearing level. So this is very much like what it would look like if you had maybe an ear infection, a conductive hearing difference. So your hearing has dropped a little bit due to sound not being able to travel fully from your outer ear to the inner ear. So you can see this is a mild level. Everything below the red and blue line, this person would still be able to access with their hearing. Everything above that line would be muffled or not necessarily as clear. So for an adult listener, this maybe doesn't seem like such an emergency because we have years of listening with an intact auditory system. We can fill in the blanks if we miss certain bits and pieces of what the person is saying. For children, on the other hand, this hearing level, a mild hearing level, can be quite significant because they are missing really important parts of speech, like the quiet sounds, the things like the S sound that make our words plural or make our words possessive, or the t, ed, or d sounds that change the tense of words. Those are the parts that are not audible and the parts that can significantly affect a learner's ability to read and write. So with this type of hearing level and your friend asked you to send him a rat, does that mean you sent him a sandwich or some sort of rodent? Because we can hear the sound, we can hear the ass sound, but we can't hear the sound that closes off that word. And again, with well-developed vocabularies, we can guess, we can use context, we can use the nature of our relationship with our communication partner to fill in those blanks. But children learning language can't necessarily do that as easily. Another important thing to remember about an audiogram is that it's just a snapshot. It's just a moment in time. There are lots of things that an audiogram doesn't consider. So in the case of ear infections, they can often cause fluctuating hearing levels. So maybe one week at school, that student is hearing quite well. and the next week there's fluid in the ear and that student is not hearing very well. Maybe the day they had their hearing test done, it didn't quite catch their level of hearing for that day. So we can't necessarily say that their hearing is always perfect every day because it might change from week to week or from day to day. An audiogram also doesn't tell us what happens when a child leaves the audiologist's booth, and how they use their functional hearing. We know that hearing tests are conducted in a very quiet, a soundproof booth. And then when a child leaves that booth, then they're inundated with background noise. There's traffic sounds. There's multiple people talking at the same time. There's the natural rise and fall of someone's voice. And the fact that we don't speak in pure tone beeps or single consonant sounds or single vowel sounds. We blend all those sounds together, and some of them may be more or less audible than others, depending on the level of hearing. People speak with accents. People's knowledge of or interest in topics can significantly impact a person's understanding. Okay, I'm going to let Amy talk a little bit now about some of the hearing assistive technology that is available to our learners.
Thank you. So let's take a look at personal devices first. And first, we're going to look at a hearing aid. So this is just a device. Chrissy, would you mind flipping? Sorry. So these are just devices that the students will wear, and they own these devices, and they go to school, and they are go home and to school with these devices. So this one is a hearing aid. This is a device that would support a little one that has a mild to severe sensorineural hearing level. So we can see the hearing aid on the left has everything labeled, but really the most important thing to look at when we're talking about these types of hearing aids are that on-off switch. And this is the student's audiologist will actually prescribe what type of hearing aid best suits your learner's hearing levels as well. Typically for our little ones, this on or the on and off and volume control has been disabled. And that's just because when their students are wearing their hearing aid, we want them to be turned on. We don't want them to come in from outside or rough and tumbling and taking off their outdoor clothes and realize that their hearing aid has been off for a couple hours. So the important thing to remember about a hearing aid is that it amplifies all sounds that are going on around your learner. So you can imagine in some louder learning environments, with desks, with being outside, with having extra people around you talking, all of that is amplified into your learner's devices and into their ears and their brain that's processing that as information. So it's hard to discriminate those important speech sounds versus those distracting background noises as well. So the hearing aid in the middle, they are becoming a lot more popular only because batteries are becoming more obsolete. So these just charge overnight on a docking station. And then on the far right, we see the ear mold. And this is a really important part for our learner because they get to choose what that ear mold looks like. So there are different colors. There's glitter. They can choose tie-dye if they want, but really we want them to be a part of this decision-making process so that they are going to take ownership over their technology as well. So hearing aids that we just saw support a little one with a mild to severe sensorineural hearing level. And so let's take a look at a cochlear implant. And this is a type of device that would support a student with a profound sensorineural hearing level. So this is a device that stimulates that auditory nerve through electrodes, but this is a video that demonstrates how that works. There's no sound, Christy, sorry.
Sorry, Amy, I didn't hear you.
Oh, I just said there's no sound on the video.
Oh, okay, hold on. I have to stop my share for a second here. And then start it again.
The Synchrony Cochlear Implant System is designed to restore hearing to individuals with severe to profound sensory neural hearing loss. Individuals with this type of hearing loss have serious difficulty hearing and may not hear at all, or may only be able to hear very loud sounds. The Synchrony cochlear implant system consists of the externally worn Sonnet 2 audio processor and the internal Synchrony 2 cochlear implant. The Sonnet 2 audio processor is worn comfortably behind the ear. The Synchrony 2 implant is surgically placed under the skin, and a flexible electrode array is inserted into the cochlea. The cochlea is the part of the inner ear that converts sound waves into nerve signals, which the brain processes as hearing. The apical region of the cochlea is responsible for detecting low-pitched sounds, while the basal region is responsible for detecting high-pitched sounds. The cochlea is lined with thousands of sensory cells, known as hair cells, which detect sound waves and send sound information as nerve signals through the auditory nerve to the brain. For individuals with severe to profound sensory neural hearing loss, most of these hair cells do not function normally and are not able to send these nerve signals properly. A cochlear implant system bypasses these non-functioning hair cells by using electrical pulses to send sound signals directly to the auditory nerve. To achieve this, the Sonnet 2 audio processor detects environmental sounds and digitally converts them into coded electrical signals. Sonnet 2 transmits these signals through the skin to the implant by a communication coil. The implant translates these coded signals into electrical pulses, which are transmitted along the electrode array to stimulate specific locations of the cochlea responsible for specific pitches. This targeted stimulation across the Synchrony
So it is really interesting when you think about that process, and that's Christy's going to talk a little bit more in the accommodation section about the importance of wait time, especially for our learners that are wearing cochlear implants. And I think we can see from that video just all of the steps and getting those electrodes to stimulate the auditory nerve, then for your brain to process the sounds as language as well. So we're going to talk more about the importance of wait time and how we can implement that into our students' learning day too. So I always wondered what it may sound like listening through a cochlear implant. And Christy actually found this video, which is fabulous because it is an audiologist who later on in her life, her hearing had declined. And she became a cochlear implant candidate. So she received one cochlear implant, and she's able to explain her journey of again, learning to listen through a device. And again, it's very important to remember that she had that strong language foundation. But we do really like using this video because she is an adult and she can articulate what it may have sounded like for her, and then how long and that process and all of that practicing took for her as well.
But you could understand what was being said. So let's go through the chronology again. It sounded first like this, and then this, and then finally this.
Her husband brought some flowers.
So you can see that it definitely got better over time. So another thing happened at around day 1900-ish, meaning 5 years later, and that was when I got my second cochlear implant. And getting a second cochlear implant improved some things in my life. For example, I could now hear sounds that were previously on my unimplanted side. I could hear better in background noise. I could hear quieter sounds, whereas before I was not able to hear quieter sounds. So those are some of the benefits to being bilateral, besides the fact that now I could, also if my battery died on one side, I could still hear on the other side. So there are definitely benefits that way. So then, now, today, 20 years later, after getting my cochlear implant, what does it sound like to me? So here is an example of what I think it sounds like to me now, as a former hearing person and now having had my implants for a long time.
Her husband brought some flowers.
So what does that sound like? It went from this to this to this
Her husband brought some flowers.
to this.
Her husband brought some flowers.
Is that really what it sounds like to me? And the answer is yes. I like to call.
So I do really like this video because again, it shares her journey and she talks about all of the AVT therapy she had, the SLP. She practiced listening to books on tape. She practiced having conversations on phone with friends or being in a loud environment versus being in a quiet environment as well. So we have to think about learning a new skill or building a muscle, all the commitment, the dedication, the practice it takes. And that's the exact same thing when we are talking about learning a language through a device, especially a cochlear implant. So I do really think that's important for parents to understand that it's 24 hours a day. We can't take our ears off, and we want our students to be able to access all of the language that's happening around them as well. So we talked about a hearing aid, we talked about a cochlear implant, and those are devices for sensorineural hearing levels. And now we're going to take a look at personal devices for a conductive hearing level. So this is actually called a bone anchored hearing aid. This is just a surgically implanted option where the little device abuts onto the abutment at the back of the skull there. So our last Lunch and Learn, we talked about the different types of hearing levels, and this just bypassed that eardrum and it's bypassing the eardrum and the middle ear, and it's supporting a conductive hearing level through vibration of the skull. So there are actually some different types of conductive devices that we are seeing more and more in the schools as well. On the top left, we have the adhere. It is a little bit tricky to see. It's kind of a tan color right behind that student's ear. Thanks, Christy. So there's actually a little adhesive sticker that sits on that skin right behind the ear, and then the device just clicks onto that adhesive sticker. So it's a non-permanent option. But again, this is becoming a lot more popular because there's no surgery involved. The middle one here that we see is a soft band. So typically this is what we would see before our students would go in and have that surgery and have that abutment. So this is just held in place by a soft band. And again, it's using the vibrations of the skull for a conductive hearing level. And then we have the ossia on the bottom right here. And this is an implant version for a conductive hearing level. Sorry, the ossia too. Okay, and I'm going to hand it back over to Christy.
Not yet, Amy. You're going to talk about the hearing assistive technology, and then we'll hand it over to me.
My apologies. So we talked about personal devices, and that's what stays on our learners from home to school and vice versa. Now we're going to look at hearing assistive technology. So this is typically what stays in the learning environment or the classroom that supports our learner, but stays within the school setting. So a hearing assistive technology really just amplifies our voice as the educator into the devices that our students are wearing, whether it's hearing aids, whether it's those the Baha, the ossia, or cochlear implants as well. So there's typically a microphone that we would wear as educators, and it would amplify your voice directly into your students' receivers. So again, this is very beneficial for our learners because regardless of where you are in the classroom as the educator, with proximity, maybe your back is to the learner because you're writing something up on the whiteboard. our learner has access to that information that's happening in the classroom. And this is just a listening simulation of how incredibly important this technology is in the classroom. So this is a simulation of listening through a set of hearing aids, and it's very similar to the audiogram that Christy had showed earlier. So a mild hearing level. So we're going to listen through hearing aids. We're going to have the teacher use the FM system, so it's going directly to the receivers, and then she's going to turn it off, and we're going to see the difference that is for our students as well.
Hi, and welcome to our listening simulation. This is a classroom demonstration to show how students with hearing loss hear in the classroom despite noise and with the added benefit of Roger. You're currently listening to me through a pair of Sky NN 70 level hearing aids. They are programmed to a 30 dB flat loss, and they're being routed through the claim finder directly into the camera. Right now, my voice is only being heard through the hearing aids. While I am wearing a Roger touchscreen mic, you can tell that it's muted because of the flashing red light. We know for students with hearing loss wearing their hearing technology, be it hearing aids, CIs, VAHAs, for their full wakeful day is critical, but unfortunately those devices aren't enough in the modern classroom, because there we have teachers who are moving around the classroom throughout the day and teaching as they go. We have peers discussing and learning from each other, and we have multimedia that augments the lessons. And studies have shown that classrooms can be as loud as 65 to 75 dB. That's as loud as a running vacuum cleaner. Imagine trying to learn in that. So for our first simulation, we're actually going to turn on some classroom noise at 70 dB, and it'll be playing through a Bluetooth speaker. Today, children, we are going to learn about space exploration. With the Artemis project, NASA will land the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024, using innovative technologies to explore more of the lunar surface than ever. Now, I've unmuted the touchscreen mic, and I'm going to reteach that passage. I want you to think about the speech intelligibility and the level of effort that you have to put in to hear it. Today, children, we're going to learn about space exploration. With the Artemis project, NASA will land the first woman and the next man on the moon by 2024, using innovative technologies to explore more of the lunar surface than ever before. In the second part of the simulation, we're going to consider what happens in an interactive classroom when students have questions, but only the teacher has a microphone. Okay, class, we are going to conclude our unit on space this Friday with an exam, so this is your time to ask me any questions that you might have. Yes, Steve?
Is the test going to be open?
It will not be. So we're going to do that again now, and the next time Steve is going to use the pass-around mic. Okay, class, we are going to conclude our unit on space this Friday. Does anyone have any questions?
Is the test going to be open note?
No, it won't be, Steve. Now, for our student with hearing loss, they may not have heard Steve's question the first time around, or they may have misunderstood my answer. So that's where the pass-around mic becomes very helpful. This last part of the simulation, we're going to
So I do really like that video. I like how high alert everyone becomes when she doesn't have that RM system turned on yet, and how the level of effort she says that it takes for our learners to be focusing on, again, all of those important speech sounds and the curriculum and all that language that's happening in the classroom. And if we think about when a student asks a question and it takes time to attend to whoever is asking the question and then relocate the teacher when you turn back around, there's a lot that's happening for our learners in the classroom, even when we have technology that is supporting them in the learning environment. So now Christy's going to talk about some general deaf and hard of hearing accommodations for our learners.
Thanks, Amy. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, when we talk about accommodations for deaf and hard of hearing learners, a lot of them we say are necessary for some. So necessary for students who have a hearing difference diagnosed. But these same accommodations are really beneficial for all learners. We know that sound field systems in classrooms are good for general education. We know that many new schools being built have them built into classrooms because it makes for easier listening and it makes for less wear and tear on teachers' voices too. So again, it's all part of that universal design for learning and setting in place accommodations that can help our learners especially, but will be beneficial for all. So we're going to start talking about some of the environmental accommodations. Again, we're just talking about a few of them. We have many, many more. We have many resources that we can support you and your teachers and your students in accessing. We just wanted to talk about some of them today that are easy to implement right away. So the first one that you see on the left is talking about a student's speech bubble. And that is an area of 3 feet around the child with a hearing difference at eye level. And it means that the student is more likely able to catch the language you're using with less effort. We know that listening through devices takes a lot more effort than listening through a typically working auditory system. So if we remain close and remain at eye level, we're going to ensure that that student has more ability to hear you and catch your language. So if you're sitting in a circle or in a horseshoe shape, which are 2 great options for students with hearing differences, we suggest that you seat the student with a hearing difference at a 45-degree angle to the person that's instructing. That way they have access to the front of your face, they can see your facial features, your facial expressions, and they're still close enough to hear your voice. A lot of times our instinct is to have the student with a hearing difference right beside us so that they can hear more clearly, but then they lose all access to your facial features. And we know that a lot of what we learn about language happens on the face of our communication partner and their body language. So a 45-degree angle is a great option for our students with hearing differences. Also, we want to make sure that we try to mitigate background noise whenever we can. We saw in that video that studies have shown that working classrooms can be anywhere between 65 and 75 decibels, which is as loud as a running vacuum cleaner. I do lots of PD sessions and observations in childcare centers, so from that 1 to 4 age group, and the average noise in those environments is mid-70s, and that's just because children are learning and playing and talking and crying and throwing blocks and building towers and making noise. So that is just the general kind of background hum is 75 dB, which is very loud and makes it very difficult for children to hear the speech signal clearly. So we want to try to reduce background noise wherever we can by turning off unnecessary noisemakers like fans, like unused electronics. We can make sure that there are chair foot covers on chairs. So a lot of chairs, especially in primary classrooms and in early childhood education now, come with plastic feet or rubber feet that reduce the amount of noise. The ones we see pictured here, the tennis ball-like ones are called hush-ups, and the other ones are called flexi felts, and those just go on the bottom of chair legs to reduce the noise that occurs when chairs are being moved back and forth in a classroom. We also want to talk about instructional accommodations. And again, these are all things that could be implemented in a student's individual education plan if you are helping a classroom teacher support those. But the first one we're going to talk about are accommodations that focus on providing visual support. So as you can imagine, any visual support that we can provide to our learners is of a great benefit. So providing written copies of presentations, instructional materials, and assignments ahead of time gives our students context and the ability to pre-read and learn any vocabulary that wasn't familiar to them. So all teachers pre-teach classes. A lot of teachers say they give out vocabulary ahead of time. Students that are deaf and hard of hearing actually need more of that one-on-one support to learn vocabulary, and that can mean looking up a word, getting the definition, looking up synonyms for that word, antonyms for that word, looking up pictures, to really get a full understanding of that vocabulary so that they are then on an equal playing field with their peers when it comes to learning a lesson in class. Visual schedules, as we can see on the bottom here, either pictured or written, depending on the age of the learner, as a preview of the day's activities, can give alerts to students if there might be a change in the regular routine. It can be really helpful during transitions. As we all know, transition times can be a lot louder. So if we have a visual schedule, we can simply point to it to show our students where they're heading to next. We know even as adults, we like to have a visual agenda of what's going to be happening in our day if we're at a conference. So visual schedules, again, are part of that universal design for learning. It's something that can benefit all of the learners in the space. So the visual information that's provided helps our learners feel more comfortable with what to expect during their day, decreases anxiety if they're not quite sure what they're supposed to be doing because they didn't hear the instructions, or if they're relying on cues from other students in order to know what's happening next. Providing visuals for learners also helps our students think about other times they've seen similar things and start to create those real world connections cognitively so that they see the picture of the clock. They're going to start to understand that that means time. So this is the time that we're going to do something. So when the clock is facing 9 o'clock in the morning, that's maybe when we do our reading activities. When it's at 10 o'clock, maybe that's when we take a break and have our snack. So they can start to make those connections. Providing the print words that we see in the example on the top here is a great literacy connection for older learners as well. Other cues, other visual cues that we really want to make sure we're always implementing include getting the students' attention before we engage in a conversation, again, especially during those transition and noisy times. So for our deaf and hard of hearing learners, we can simply flick the lights, we can wave in their sight line, we can do a tap on the shoulder, so we can make sure that that student is ready to listen. The important thing to remember is that our deaf and hard of hearing students will hear you. If you ask them if they hear you, they will say yes, because they have heard that there is speech happening, but they might not hear the beginning of your instruction. They might not notice until you're partway through that instruction that, oh yeah, that's my cue to listen, so I better turn my attention to you and pay attention to what you're saying. So by getting their attention first before we start, it ensures that they are ready to listen. The same goes for identifying the speaker. So if there is more than one adult in the classroom and one teacher is giving an instruction and then the next adult is going to say something, we want to point to that person, give our student time to locate the speaker, and then wait before starting the message. If there is not a pass-around microphone in the classroom, we need to make sure that we point to the student that's going to be speaking next, wait for everyone to attend to that speaker. And then as an educator, I want to make sure I repeat what that person says, just to make sure everybody has access to the information in the classroom. Providing gestural cues when giving directions is also beneficial, and we do that naturally as well, especially for younger learners. Like, I want to direct your attention over to the word wall because that's what we're going to be looking at next. Another simple adjustment, which provides both visual and literacy support, is to turn on closed captioning during any video shown. Again, if you're not using if you're using previously captioned videos, just make sure you preview them first. We know that YouTube is notorious for not accurately captioning some things, but Google Slides has captioning embedded in it, so we just have to remember to turn it on. There are apps that older students can get on their phone, things like Web Captioner or Live Transcribe, that they can have their device just sitting on their desk, which will transcribe what the educator is saying. So lots of options to make sure that our students are accessing the language of the classroom. The other thing I wanted to mention too is that for those students with limited access to speech, so that they are not using technology like hearing aids or cochlear implants to access speech, an interpreter might be in the classroom for students using visual language. So again, this is a much more in-depth process to get an interpreter support. So that is something that Amy and I can certainly assist you in getting more information about or learning more about. Just one quick note about interpreters is that if there is an interpreter in place, we want to make sure that we're speaking directly to the student and not the interpreter in that situation. Another strategy that bridges both visual and auditory learning is the use of a buddy system, as we see here. So if the student is paired with a reliable friend that they're comfortable with, they can then look to that partner in their classroom for a discrete visual cue if maybe some instructions might be missed. They could provide support with note taking so that if that learner has their attention focused on trying to listen or watching an interpreter during a presentation, or they could ask for verbal clarification if they missed part of the message. So it's important that we use this strategy with discretion and check in frequently with the student and the buddy to make sure that everyone is still comfortable with the current arrangements. We may want to change buddies up frequently so everyone gets a chance to try. The important part is that we get everyone kind of involved in supporting the student, and our student learns those advocacy skills that they're going to need for their entire life. The one voice rule is a strategy that's most likely in place in classrooms already, but really important for our learners who have challenges with audition and working with interpreters. It just means that we make sure that only one person is talking at a time, and this can be implemented right from childcare. I was at a childcare center yesterday, and the educators were working very hard to make sure that even the very young children knew that only one person was talking at a time to allow their friend the ability to hear all of them. Wait time is really important. Amy mentioned it a little bit earlier. Wait time allows a little bit of extra time for processing. We know that listening through devices can take a little bit longer, and wait time allows our students the time to process that language. If we wait long enough, it usually will result in a response from our learner. Even if it wasn't the response we were expecting, that can give us some information about whether it was a vocabulary issue, whether the student just didn't hear us at all. It can let our partner know that it's their turn to respond, so it kind of highlights those turn-taking skills. It reduces anxiety for our learners because they know you're going to give them time to think about what they want to say and come out with a response. You'll notice again, we're talking about hearing assistive technology. It comes up in both environmental instruction accommodations and instructional accommodations. It's really, really important, as we saw from that video. So we need to just make sure that we're always using that hearing assistive technology if it's been prescribed for that learner. And the last one we talked about earlier too is repetition of peer responses during class discussion. So if we don't have the benefit of that pass around microphone, it's really important that we repeat what the students in class say with regards to questions asked or responses given to make that language more accessible to our learner. And finally, the last one that I wanted to talk about was assessment accommodations. So we know that it's really beneficial for our learners to have some additional time for assessment, to be able to provide oral and written clarification when appropriate. Sometimes we can provide our learners an alternative setting to do tests. We can provide word processing for written tasks, an interpreter or scribe when appropriate. And in some cases, we can provide fewer tasks, but we want to make sure that we use that with discretion as well, because sometimes fewer tasks can mean we are modifying the program. So in order to have it maintain just an accommodation, we have to plan that carefully. And the last one there's not a slide here for it, but again, the impact of listening fatigue is very real, and that is the same for students trying to listen through devices or trying to watch an interpreter. It is exhausting to try to be on all day. For many of us, we can be involved in another task while we're listening. We can be looking at our paper, we can be writing something down, we could be typing something on our phone. Our learners who are deaf or hard of hearing can't do that. They need to be always focused on the listening or always focused on the interpreter. So it's important that we recognize that we sometimes need to pair language-heavy tasks in class with something that doesn't rely so much on language. Sometimes we need to allow our student to go get a drink of water or take something to the office or do an activity like do a puzzle or something quieter that just doesn't require so much emphasis on the listening task.
So we really wanted to take this opportunity to kind of highlight some of the specific accommodations that are happening every day at our bilingual deaf and hard of hearing schools in Ontario. So there's a school in Milton, London, and Belleville as well. With what we know about the importance of incidental learning and how we use this as a source for information sharing and sharing knowledge as well. We have access to incidental learning opportunities throughout our everyday living. So we want to make sure that our students also have access to incidental learning opportunities as well. So for our students who are wearing devices and may not overhear conversations due to proximity to the speaker, for our ASL users who may not have appropriate language models, we just want to make sure that they have exposure and access to all of these opportunities throughout the day. So a lot of time is focused at the schools on incidental learning. They're stopping, they're investigating, they're reviewing, they're collecting data on interest and really connecting it to real life experiences as well. We see in this slide that there's a biodiversity project. So there's an insect study with clouded yellow butterflies and spur-throated grasshoppers. And I think what's so important for deaf and hard of hearing learners is that they understand that there are a variety of names and the importance of knowing that as well. It's not just butterfly. They have ecosystems and different butterflies in different regions as well. So we want to make sure that our students are aware of that, but then also understand that there are a variety of names for butterflies and insects and trees too. We have families, retired teachers, graduated students that come back into the schools and are retelling stories, sharing hand-shaped poems, and really we're connecting those opportunities to the community partners as well. We also have safety accommodations within the 3 schools. So we see here on the top left, we have visual announcements for our learners. So we're not relying on auditory access. So everything is running throughout the day. There are weather updates. In the middle, in Belleville, they have Wolf TV. So this is a teacher just sharing what is happening throughout the day and what the announcements are looking like. So it's very visual. Lots of teachers, lots of students are on the TV during the day and sharing information. And then we also have safety accommodations for our learners too, where we see the visual fire alarm. So they are not relying on interpreted information from another peer or an adult. They're actually accessing that information in live time. And then we have community partners that are always connected with our schools too. So I think at the other Lunch and Learn, we talked about the maple syrup tapping process at Sir James Whitney, which is so incredible because they educate the students on, you know, identifying the trees and the tapping process and the bottling and the boiling and all the steps in between. So everyone is very involved and very hands-on, which is really incredible at the schools for the deaf and hard of hearing. We have OYAP and student co-op, where we see on the top right here, our students are operating skyjacks and they're also receiving tickets for some of the work that we're doing. And then in the middle, we have Migwans, who is a student that had graduated from Sir James Whitney, and he comes back to the school and he really supports our younger learners with connections to culture and learning, and just keeping that connection with him and the importance of that and in his heart to our future students in the school right now, I think is absolutely incredible.
Thanks, Amy. So just to wrap up today, we just wanted to talk a little bit about how resource services can support. And we start at the low service level and we go all the way up to high service level, which is when our teachers go into the home to provide support. So some families just want to get a newsletter from us. They just want to keep up with what's happening. They want to keep up with any new information or resources. So that is at the lowest level. And we send those out every month to families that are on the home visiting caseload. We have community learning sessions. So people will set up play groups in the community, and families are invited to come and bring their children, and they do crafts together and they learn songs together, and they basically allow children who have hearing differences to meet other children who are just like them and families to connect. And it's a really great experience for our deaf and hard of hearing learners in the community. Amy and I fit into the consultant section. So again, we support the school boards throughout the province. We support the early childhood education centers. We do PD. So that's kind of where we fit in. We also provide lots of workshops throughout the province as well. We have our play and learning centers. And those are located at the different schools for the deaf, and they are wonderful centers with lots of activities and materials. And again, they operate at different times throughout the month, and families are invited to come and participate in the events at a play and learning center. And then at the top, we have our in-home service. And that is where one of our resource service teachers goes into a home on a biweekly basis for those children from birth up until full-time childcare entry or full-time school entry. And they teach parents about hearing differences and about making sure that their child is keeping on track with regards to language, literacy, math, well-being, and basically getting ready for school. And this is our website. We just wanted to share. It's a work in progress as always, but you can see here it's pdsbnet.ca. And this is kind of a breakdown of what we do. And I think I have it on the next slide here. I can pull it up. Maybe not. Yeah. So I just picked the resource services section and I chose the consultant services. So again, you can also choose the preschool and early years services as well. You can find information about deaf and hard of hearing supports, blind low vision supports. And this one just shows some of the different activities that consultants do. And again, all our referral information is on there as well. So our delivery model is like this. We support the province of Ontario. We can do it on location or remotely. There is no cost, and all services are available upon request using our referral form that is available on the website or through just emailing Amy or myself. And here are our emails and phone numbers that are for you to use. And I think that is the end. So normally we would have time for questions. But since you will probably be watching this virtually, please feel free to use our email addresses and reach out to us anytime if you have questions or if we can provide resources or offer any other support. And we want to thank you, Patricia, for having us again today. We always enjoy coming and presenting to the Chiefs of Ontario.
Yes, thank you very, very much. It's always informative. It's always a pleasure to share time with you to learn about services for the deaf and hard of hearing. I had one question in reference to the supplies and equipment, accessing the implants if need be, or accessing any of the equipment. Who actually pays for that?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And as far as the hearing aids and cochlear implants go, that would be facilitated through the audiologist and through the infant hearing program. They can support with finding funding for that part of it. As far as the in-school portion, so the FM systems, if you are in a district school board, that comes through the government grant fund called the Special Education Support Amount, I believe, SCA, I can't remember the exact term. And so your school staff would help apply for that, and they would use a referral or a prescription from an audiologist and get some of that equipment. In some of the Six Nations schools that I've supported, they have put in a request through Jordan's principal to have that material provided to the school as well. So there are different options. It's kind of individual and kind of work through that on an individual basis with the child.
And as First Nation, learners within your school, there's also that not benefits available through non-insured health benefits through our status card. So I would look forward to creating a joint session to roll out those opportunities at a later date. If
That
you'd
would be
like.
great.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
For sure.
Mhm.
That brings us to 12:26, and again, just a wealth of information. Very, very well put. And I want to thank you from on behalf of the special education within our Chiefs of Ontario Education Unit. Thank you very much. We will have this session available on our website. We will run a second session if the requests are there, because it's very important to have attendance from our education teams. But again, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Patricia. Thanks, Ashley.
Take care.